Imagine this. It's the turn of the millennium. December 31st, 2000. Most of Tokyo is gearing up for a huge New Year's Eve celebration. But in the quiet, upscale neighborhood of Setagaya, something chilling has already happened. Something that feels less like a crime and more like a ghost story written in blood. A loving family of four, a father, a mother, a teenage daughter, and a young son, were massacred in their own home. Stabbed, beaten, and strangled. The killer then didn't just leave. He stayed. For hours. He ate ice cream, surfed the internet, took a nap, and even used the family's first aid kit to treat his own wounds. 25 years later, the perpetrator's DNA is on file. His unique clothes are identified, and his chilling movements are known. But he remains a phantom. A single killer for victims and an investigation that has baffled the world's most meticulous police force for a quarter of a century. This isn't just a true crime story. It's a terrifying look at how pure evil can vanish into thin air. The date was December 31st, 2000, but the official investigation would begin on January 1st, 2001. That first day of the new millennium should have been a day of hope, a clean slate. For the Miyazawa family, it was simply the end. The Miyazawas lived in a nice, but modest, two-story house in the tranquil Setagaya ward of Tokyo. Mikio, the 44-year-old father, was a driven, friendly marketing executive. His wife, Yasuko, at 41, was a caring mother who also worked part-time as a tutor. They were a normal, happy, middle-class family. Their daughter, Nina, was 16 and active in school, and their 6-year-old son, Ray, was full of life and looking forward to the gifts the new year would bring. On December 31st, Yasuko's mother, Haruko, called the house repeatedly. Haruko and her husband lived only a few blocks away, and it was a long-standing family tradition for the whole extended family to gather on New Year's Eve. But the Miyazawa line was silent. Haruko's anxiety mounted throughout the day. She knew her daughter was meticulous and reliable. Silence was not like her. As night fell and the celebratory fireworks began popping across the city, Haruko's worry turned to dread. She convinced her husband to go with her to the house. It was just after 10:30 p.m. The lights were off, which was strange, but the door wasn't locked. They stepped inside, and the silence in the entryway felt heavy, suffocating. The air was cold. Everything seemed neat, almost too neat, on the first floor. Haruko called out to Yasuko. No answer. She started up the steep wooden staircase. That's when she saw the first sign that something was horribly wrong. The air upstairs was colder than the night air outside. The floorboards were slick. In a small, narrow hallway, a horrifying tableau unfolded. Mikio Miyazawa was crumpled at the foot of the stairs leading to the second floor, a victim of brutal, overwhelming force. He hadn't been killed here, but his body was discovered in a place that suggested he'd been making a final, desperate stand. Haruko's scream cut through the quiet neighborhood, a sound that marked the true, horrifying beginning of the Setagaya family murder case. The new century had barely begun, and it was already stained crimson. The police were called, and the quiet suburban street was instantly transformed into the epicenter of a nightmare. When the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, arrived, the officers were immediately struck by the sheer brutality and the strangeness of the scene. The killer had acted with extraordinary violence, but he had also left behind a trail of bizarre domestic activity that made the whole crime scene feel unreal, almost theatrical. The victims were found in two separate locations. Mikio, the father, was in the upstairs hallway. His injuries indicated he had put up a fierce, prolonged struggle, fighting for his life and the lives of his family. He had suffered multiple stab wounds and blunt force trauma. Inside the small, upstairs master bedroom, the other three members of the family were found. Yasuko and Nina were tragically killed in their beds. Young Ray, just 6, was also murdered, having apparently been sleeping on the floor next to his mother's bed. This detail was particularly heartbreaking. The crime had been committed while the victims were sleeping or had just woken up. It was an ambush, not a confrontation, at least not initially. The weapon used was an impressive, razor-sharp sashimi knife, a traditional Japanese carving knife, that was left embedded in one of the victims. It was determined that the killer had brought this knife with him. It was a specialized, professional-grade knife, the type used in high-end sushi restaurants, which immediately told the investigators something crucial. This was not an impulsive crime committed with a kitchen utensil. It was a planned, deliberate attack. The killer came prepared. The physical attack itself was relentless, but the scene soon offered confounding contradictions. After the murders, the killer had moved through the house with a shocking sense of ease, even relaxation. He had gone through drawers and cabinets, but nothing of significant value was taken. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. In the kitchen, the police found a partially eaten carton of Häagen-Dazs ice cream, still in the freezer. In the living room, a beverage carton was found open. The killer had even used the family's bathroom. He was not rushing. He was settling in. This showed an astonishing level of cold-blooded composure and suggested either an intimate knowledge of the home's layout or a complete lack of fear of being caught. This wasn't a frenzied lunatic. It was a methodical, almost casual predator. The amount of time the killer spent in the house, estimated to be anywhere from 2 to 10 hours, became the most baffling and chilling aspect of the crime. He wasn't just a killer. He was a temporary tenant of the House of the Dead. In a rare and fortunate stroke of luck for the police, the killer had been sloppy, or perhaps so arrogant he didn't care. Unlike many high-profile Japanese murders, this case was an absolute goldmine of forensic evidence. The killer had left behind a trove of clues, and the MPD would meticulously catalog every last one. First, and most critically, was the DNA. On the bodies of the victims, on the knife handle, and in several other places around the house, the killer's DNA was recovered. This was not just a partial profile. It was a full, clear genetic fingerprint. Analysis determined the killer was male, with a distinctive genetic marker for the enzyme amylase, suggesting he had mixed-race heritage, possibly with a mother of Japanese descent. This was a massive clue in a country with a relatively homogeneous population. Next came the physical items the killer left behind. He had apparently taken a few of his own belongings with him, but he also left a remarkable collection of unique clothes and equipment. He left a distinctive black and gray patterned scarf, a waist pouch containing wood chips, and, most famously, a pair of expensive, UK-manufactured, size 28, 11 US, dark-colored Schlesinger sneakers. The sneakers were crucial because the tread matched footprints found both inside the house and outside, leading away from the scene. Inside the kitchen, a package of small, colored wood chips was found. These chips were used for crafting and were traced back to a specific brand sold at a major craft store chain. Even more precise, the scarf was identified as being sold only in a few stores in the Kanto region of Japan, suggesting the killer lived nearby or had purchased the item locally. The level of detail was staggering. The police recovered minute traces of sand and dirt, which were later analyzed. The sand was determined to be a fine, distinctive type often found near the American military bases west of Tokyo, hinting at a possible connection to that area. They even found microscopic particles of hinoki wood, Japanese cypress, which is commonly used in traditional Japanese shogi and go board manufacturing. The final piece of the forensic puzzle came from the computer. The killer had reportedly spent time online, using the Miyazawa family's computer. Although initial evidence suggested he had tried to erase his history, police experts were able to recover fragments of his activity, showing he had accessed the internet around 1:18 a.m. on January 1st. What he was looking at was a mystery, but the fact that he was calmly surfing the web while the 4 bodies lay nearby amplified the chilling psychology of the crime. With DNA, fingerprints, unique clothing, and his internet trace, investigators felt they had all the pieces. But solving a crime requires more than pieces, it requires a face. The sheer volume of forensic evidence should have led to an immediate arrest. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, MPD, certainly thought so. They had the killer's full DNA profile, which they immediately uploaded to every domestic and international database available, hoping for a match. They had the unique Schlesinger sneakers, size 28, a rare find in Japan. They had a patterned scarf with chips and sand particles that pointed to specific regions. The investigation became an immense dragnet. The police focused heavily on the unique items. They tracked down the exact retailer of the specific model of Schlesinger sneakers. The shoes were only sold in a few stores across the Kanto region, and specifically, this model was part of a limited overseas import. The police tracked down every single buyer of those shoes. They interviewed hundreds of people, asking where they bought them, how often they wore them, and where they were on New Year's Eve. Every single purchaser was cleared. This was the first major dead end. Why didn't the killer show up on the sales records? Had he stolen the shoes? Had they been a gift? The second major effort was tracing the distinctive scarf. It was a patterned piece, manufactured abroad but imported and sold through a limited distribution network in Japan. Like the shoes, the police checked the purchase records, but the result was the same: no match to the DNA or the crime. The wood chips provided another, frustrating path. They were commonly used in craft projects, and the specific brand was popular. The police theorized the killer might have been involved in woodworking, perhaps as a hobby or a job. This theory tied into the microscopic traces of hinoki wood, used for shogi boards, leading them to interview craftsmen, game enthusiasts, and woodworking clubs across the region. Again, the trail went cold. The most promising lead remained the DNA profile. The analysis suggested the killer was likely of mixed Asian and European heritage. In Japan, while not impossible, this heritage is relatively uncommon and should have narrowed the focus considerably. The police took over 15,000 voluntary DNA samples from individuals who lived or worked near the Miyazawa residence, particularly those who matched the general physical description that was later developed. Every single sample came back negative. The killer was clearly an outsider, or someone who had completely avoided the police dragnet. As the weeks turned into months, the initial promise of the forensic gold mine began to feel like a curse. They had all the evidence, but none of it pointed to a name. The killer was a walking collection of highly unique, traceable goods, yet he remained an invisible man. The police were left with the chilling realization that their suspect was not a ghost, but he was certainly acting like one, slipping through the fingers of one of the most sophisticated police forces in the world. The hunt for the Schlesinger man had begun, and it was quickly turning into one of history's greatest forensic mysteries. The investigation didn't just focus on the killer's belongings. It scrutinized the crime's geography, hoping to determine where the killer came from and where he disappeared to. The Miyazawa house sat near the Shinzo Kawaii Pond area, a quiet, residential zone, but it was also relatively close to several major transport hubs. The presence of the specific type of sand, often found near the American military base facilities west of Tokyo, was a significant factor. This led investigators to explore a potential link to foreign nationals, people who worked on or near the bases, or individuals involved in importing specialized goods from those areas. The police spent immense resources checking employee logs, visitors, and transportation records around the base areas, trying to connect the unique DNA profile to someone in that sphere. No concrete link ever materialized, yet the sand was undeniable. It suggested the killer either lived or spent significant time in that particular region. Equally important was the killer's exit strategy. The police created a detailed timeline of the possible routes the killer could have taken after leaving the house in the early morning hours of January 1st. Given that he was covered in blood and had injuries he needed to hide, he wouldn't have been able to simply walk onto a train or bus. He must have used a less visible means of transport or had a destination very close by. A neighbor reported seeing a man near the house at a very late hour on December 30th. This man was described as tall and slender, matching the general height derived from the footprints. Crucially, another neighbor, who was out walking his dog, recalled seeing a man running away from the vicinity of the Miyazawa house around 4 a.m. on New Year's Day. The description was vague due to the darkness, but the timing matched the window the killer was believed to have departed. Police then focused on the local train lines, the Odakyu line and the Keio line, which both had stations within a reasonable walking distance. They theorized the killer might have walked a great distance, perhaps several miles, to reach a less crowded, more distant station where his blood-stained appearance would draw less attention. However, the lack of security cameras in the year 2000, especially in residential areas, severely hampered this line of inquiry. The geography of the ghost showed where the killer wasn't. He wasn't a local, otherwise someone would have surely recognized the unique scarf or the tall figure. The conclusion was that the killer was likely driven or used a remote access point on the transportation grid. He was a professional in disappearing, making him geographically untraceable, a phantom who arrived and left on his own precise schedule. The city of Tokyo, in all its immense size, was unable to swallow the evidence, yet it could not spit out the suspect's name. Why did the killer stay so long? This question became the enduring enigma of the Setagaya case. Most killers flee immediately after the act, driven by panic and the fear of discovery. This killer did the opposite. His actions suggest not only incredible composure, but also a terrifying sense of ownership over the scene. Investigators developed several theories about the killer's mindset. The first was the search for valuables or documents. While the house was ransacked, the killer left behind a large amount of cash and credit cards. This dispelled the initial robbery gone wrong theory. If he wasn't looking for money, what was he looking for? Was it specific, incriminating documents? A clue that could connect him to the family? The second theory, and the most chilling, was that the killer was driven by an intense, personal resentment or obsession, possibly seeking a moment of ultimate dominance. The sheer brutality of the attack on Mikio, who fought back fiercely, suggested rage. Yet, the actions afterward, eating, sleeping, and using the computer, suggested utter detachment. The killer even took the time to go through the freezer. He ate ice cream. He drank tea. He used the shower and then used the family's first aid kit to bandage a significant cut, presumably suffered during the struggle with Mikio. All these mundane, domestic acts, performed hours after committing a quadruple homicide, paint a portrait of a deeply disturbed but entirely controlled individual. Some profilers suggested the act of staying was a form of ritualistic satisfaction, a way of savoring the moment, or perhaps a calculated effort to stage the scene or wait until a safer time to leave. The fact that the killer used the family's computer to access the internet, even recovering fragments of his browsing history, suggested a chilling blend of calculated caution and brazen arrogance. Was he checking the news? Was he attempting to cover his tracks digitally? Another theory posited that the killer was waiting for someone else, perhaps an accomplice who failed to show, or another victim. This was later dismissed, but the idea of the killer relaxing in the living room while four bodies lay upstairs sent shivers down the spines of the investigators. They were hunting not just a murderer, but a high-functioning psychopath who saw the victim's house as his temporary refuge. The crime was a terrifying mix of planning, uncontrolled violence, and cold, leisurely post-mortem behavior. The psychological profile was as complex and contradictory as the evidence he left behind. The killer, in effect, lived a short, chilling life inside the Miyazawa house, and then simply disappeared. The motive remains the single greatest stumbling block in the Setagaya case. When a killer leaves behind a mountain of evidence, DNA, fingerprints, unique items, it usually means they are either sloppy or desperate. But this killer was meticulous in his preparation, bringing the specialized knife, and relaxed in his departure, suggesting control. Yet, no clear motive ever emerged. If it was a simple grudge or personal revenge, the killer would likely have known the family and therefore been identifiable through local witness reports or connections. Mikio Miyazawa was a marketing executive who traveled often, but his professional life seemed clean. Yasuko was a gentle mother and tutor. There were no known enemies, no illicit dealings, and no signs of blackmail or severe personal disputes. The police explored a theory involving land disputes. The Miyazawa house was built on a piece of land that was part of a larger complex owned by Yasuko's family. There had been minor disagreements years earlier over the sale or development of surrounding plots, but nothing that seemed violent enough to provoke such a horrific, targeted attack. This line of inquiry quickly led nowhere. Another possibility was a professional connection to Mikio. Did he uncover something shady in his marketing work? Was he preparing to expose some corporate corruption? Police meticulously audited his work files and contacted dozens of his colleagues. While his job involved intense business dealings, no evidence of threats or life-threatening secrets ever surfaced. The most disturbing theory focuses on the daughter, Nina, who was 16. Given the age and the nature of the crime, police briefly investigated potential stalkers or social media conflicts. But Nina's life was also deemed normal and drama-free. The entire family seemed to exist outside the world of high-risk behavior that often precedes a targeted murder. The very lack of motive reinforces the psychological profile of the killer being a complete stranger, someone acting out of pure, terrifying impulse or a generalized, misdirected rage. But if it was random, why the careful preparation, the specific knife, and the hours spent in the house? The lack of connection is so absolute that it suggests the crime was either an act of professional execution where the target was mistaken, or a profound, private secret that the four victims took to their graves. Without a clear why, the investigation was forced to rely solely on the who, the unique man described by his DNA and his gear, a ghost without a history or a reason. The Setagaya family murder instantly became one of Japan's most infamous unsolved cases, and the police response was unprecedented in its scale and duration. This wasn't a case that was filed away after a few years. It became a symbol of national failure and a persistent challenge to the meticulous reputation of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police. Immediately after the discovery, the MPD established a dedicated, permanent task force. This task force has been operational for over 25 years. It is housed in a specific office, still reviewing the same evidence, following up on cold leads, and incorporating new forensic technology as it becomes available. At its peak, the investigation involved tens of thousands of officers. The commitment of resources is staggering. The police have interviewed over 150,000 people. They have received and processed over 30,000 tips from the public. They meticulously mapped the routes of the Schlesinger sneakers, the Hinoki wood, and the unique sand, creating complex digital models of possible suspect movements. Every single person who bought that model of shoe was interviewed, often repeatedly. The case also saw the MPD take unusual steps to engage the public. They established an enormous, standing reward, which has been continually increased, reaching the equivalent of over $250,000. A massive amount for a reward in Japan. They released highly detailed, color reconstructions of the killer's unique scarf and the waist pouch. They even put up posters and billboards near train stations showing a life-size photo of the Schlesinger shoe sole pattern. However, the police have faced criticism. Early on, some argued that the crime scene was not preserved perfectly, potentially losing trace evidence, though the sheer volume of evidence recovered speaks against this. More pointedly, critics argue that the police focused too heavily on the foreign national angle due to the sand and the DNA profile, perhaps overlooking a local Japanese person who simply fit the genetic criteria or had traveled abroad. Despite the hurdles and the lack of a breakthrough, the commitment remains absolute. Every New Year's Day, senior officers hold a press conference, often standing outside the now-demolished Miyazawa house, appealing for new information. The case is a matter of institutional pride and a moral obligation to the murdered family. The Setagaya case is not just an investigation. It is a marathon of commitment, a decades-long promise to catch the phantom killer. The unique genetic profile of the killer immediately mandated an international search. The MPD shared the killer's full DNA profile with Interpol and police forces worldwide, particularly those in countries with large Japanese diaspora or those that commonly traded specialized goods with Japan. The profile suggested a parentage mix, potentially a North American or European father and an Asian, possibly Japanese, mother. This focus led the investigators to work closely with American and European agencies. They cross-referenced the DNA against vast databases in the US and UK, hoping for a familial match that could narrow down a potential suspect living in Japan. The sand found on the killer's clothing, the distinct type often associated with areas near American military installations, was the strongest international link. This led the MPD to check the records of thousands of military personnel, contractors, and their families who were stationed in the Tokyo region around the year 2000. They checked flight and base access logs, looking for anyone matching the killer's height and shoe size who might have left the country abruptly after the new year. This gargantuan effort yielded no direct suspects. Another international angle emerged from the specific brand of the clothing. The Schlesinger shoes and the unique scarf were primarily manufactured and popular in the UK and Europe. Detectives spent time in London and other European capitals tracing the supply chain and attempting to find records of bulk purchases or thefts that might have led to the goods ending up in Tokyo. Despite the global reach of the investigation, the killer's DNA simply did not exist in any criminal or forensic database anywhere in the world. This suggested one of three possibilities. 1. He had never been convicted of a crime requiring DNA submission. 2. He was a first-time killer. Or 3. He was not a permanent resident of any country with a comprehensive DNA database. The irony of the case is painful. The police have a world-class, perfect DNA sample, but no one to compare it to. The killer is genetically known but socially anonymous. The international clues, the sand, the shoes, the DNA, all pointed toward an exciting, solvable mystery, but instead, they created a ghost who crossed borders and systems without leaving a traceable legal footprint. The key to the Setagaya murder likely rests with a single person, somewhere on Earth, who knows the name attached to that unique DNA profile. One of the most modern and confounding pieces of evidence was the killer's use of the Miyazawa family computer. This crime happened just as the internet was becoming commonplace, and the killer, in a bizarre act of casualness, decided to use the family's PC after committing the murders. The computer was seized immediately and subjected to intensive forensic analysis. The killer had tried to delete his activity, running a basic delete function, but skilled technicians were able to recover key fragments of his digital footprint. It was a faint trail, but a trail nonetheless. The analysis showed that the computer was used between approximately 1:18 a.m. and 10 a.m. on January 1st. During this time, the killer accessed several specific websites. The most critical fragments revealed he had looked at files related to the specific neighborhood, accessing information about local community events and potentially local maps or transport schedules. This reinforced the idea that he might have been an outsider unfamiliar with the immediate area. More intriguingly, the killer had reportedly accessed a website that offered information on how to treat wounds. This corroborated the physical evidence found at the scene. The killer had used the family's first aid kit to bandage a serious hand injury sustained during the brutal struggle with Mikio. This action, calmly researching medical aid while surrounded by his victims, spoke volumes about his cold, calculated nature. Another retrieved fragment indicated he may have attempted to use the computer to check personal email or access an online forum, although the specific content was irretrievably lost. Had he contacted an accomplice? Had he checked on an alibi? We'll never know for sure, but the act of logging on for hours suggested a chilling level of relaxation and security, as if he believed his digital trail, like his physical trail, would never be successfully tracked. In the early years of the investigation, the police focused heavily on the IP address used, but because the Miyazawas were connected via a generic dial-up service of the time, the IP address proved to be a dead end. Furthermore, the limited security and tracking protocols of 2000 meant that cross-referencing activity with ISPs was nearly impossible without a name. The digital footprint was clear, showing exactly what the killer did, but it provided no clue as to who he was. The killer was a ghost in the real world and a ghost on the fledgling World Wide Web. As the years stretched on, the physical landscape of the crime scene began to change, creating an added emotional and logistical challenge for the investigators. For 2 decades, the Miyazawa house stood as a grim memorial. It was left largely untouched, a chilling time capsule maintained by Yasuko's grieving parents. The parents, Haruko and her husband, maintained the property meticulously. They kept a light on every night, a silent vigil against the darkness, and placed flowers and offerings at the entrance. The sight of the dark, silent house in the quiet residential neighborhood served as a constant, stark reminder to the community and the police of the unsolved crime. The house itself became a symbol of the investigative failure, a physical embodiment of the pain of loss. For the investigators, the house was crucial. They could return to it, re-examine angles, and apply new forensic techniques. With every advance in science, new ways to detect trace DNA, new methods of blood spatter analysis, the house stood ready to yield another secret. It was essential for recreating the final moments of the Miyazawa family. However, after years of intense emotional pressure and the parents' declining health, the decision was finally made to demolish the house in 2021. The parents had held on to it for so long, hoping it would hold the final key to identifying the killer. The demolition was a profoundly symbolic moment. It marked the end of the physical link to the crime and, for many, the official transition of the case from a recent tragedy to a cold case. Before the demolition, the police conducted one final, exhaustive sweep, using the latest 3D scanning technology and microparticle analysis. They found no new major evidence. The act of tearing down the structure did not end the investigation. The task force remains operational, but it did shift the focus entirely from the physical crime scene to the mountains of forensic and digital data that have been collected over the decades. The crime now exists entirely in data banks and memory, no longer anchored by a physical structure. Over the years, the lack of a motive allowed various sensational theories to bloom in the Japanese media, each more complex than the last. The police, while sticking to the physical evidence, have had to publicly address the three main speculative narratives. Theory 1. Yakuza, or organized crime. This theory suggests that Mikio Miyazawa had somehow stumbled upon a money laundering scheme or had a high-stakes gambling debt. The murder would then be a professional hit designed to send a brutal message, and the prolonged stay was a calculated attempt to destroy or retrieve specific evidence, or perhaps a chilling signature. However, detectives could find no connection between Mikio and any organized crime group. The killer's sloppy exit, leaving the Slazenger shoes and the DNA, doesn't match the typical, clean, professional execution style of the Yakuza. Theory 2. Targeted personal revenge. This theory suggests the killer knew the family but was so carefully disguised and planned that he could not be connected. The revenge would have been extreme, requiring the elimination of the entire family to achieve total silence or ultimate satisfaction. This aligns with the rage and overkill used, but it begs the question, how could a person with such intense hatred for the Miyazawas be so unknown to them and the local community? Theory 3. The random killer and the thrill of the kill. This is the most frightening theory. It posits that the killer was a thrill seeker who chose the Miyazawa house randomly, perhaps because it had a light on or seemed an easy target. The extensive planning, the specialized knife, the unique shoes, was part of the ritual of the kill itself. The hours spent inside were not about searching for valuables or documents, but simply indulging in the act and the feeling of dominance. The mixed-race DNA, the specific clothing, and the absence from databases suggest a drifter, someone who passed through Tokyo for a short period and then left the country, never to return. This theory explains the lack of motive and the lack of a database match, but it makes the killer almost impossible to catch unless he slips up in another jurisdiction. The police have followed every path, but the truth remains locked within the physical evidence left at the scene. The evidence points to an outsider, a methodical, cold-blooded killer with access to unique foreign goods, likely passing through the area, who had a strong connection to Western Tokyo, and who carried out a crime of unimaginable brutality before vanishing into the dawn of the new century. In the long, frustrating hunt for the Setagaya killer, the investigation has become a masterclass in the use of trace evidence. Long after the house was gone, the focus shifted to the microscopic pieces of the killer's life he unwittingly left behind. The wood chips, initially a minor clue, became a central point of the investigation. Police determined that these were specifically used in making specialized wooden goods, and the type of wood and the way they were cut pointed to a high-end craft shop or specialized supplier. The effort to trace them was exhaustive, involving interviews with hundreds of craftspeople and store owners, yet the chips never led to a definite suspect. The sand particles, linked to the area near the U.S. military bases, were continuously reanalyzed using increasingly sophisticated methods. Researchers sought to match the precise geological and chemical makeup of the sand to a specific beach, construction site, or walking path. While they pinpointed the general area, finding the killer's exact location proved impossible. The sand suggested movement, but not a fixed address. Perhaps the most compelling piece of trace evidence was the unique composition of the killer's DNA itself, particularly the rare enzyme markers. Scientists have repeatedly tried to use familial DNA searching, a technique that finds close relatives of a suspect already in a database, but Japan's strict privacy laws and the lack of a suitable population database have severely limited this option. Every time technology improves, police return to the genetic profile, hoping a newly added database entry from overseas might finally match a distant cousin. The police have even turned to analyzing the traces of blood and skin cells found on the unique Slazenger sneakers. They have released detailed composite images of the clothing, appealing for anyone who might have sold or custom-ordered such items. The entire case rests on the small, almost invisible fragments the killer left behind. He was meticulous in his murder but careless in his cleanup, and the traces of his life remain the only tangible connection to his identity. As the case crosses the quarter-century mark, the emotional weight on the original investigators and the families of the victims is immense. For Haruko, the mother of Yasuko and the grandmother of Nina and Rei, the hope for an arrest has become a painful, decades-long prayer. Every New Year's Day, she and her family publicly plead for the public to come forward, reminding the world that 4 innocent lives were stolen and justice remains elusive. For the police task force, the 25th anniversary is a moment of profound reflection and renewed commitment. Despite no arrests, the task force remains active. They rotate younger detectives onto the team, pairing them with seasoned veterans who have been working the case since 2001. This ensures institutional knowledge isn't lost and fresh eyes are continually brought to the old evidence. The case also serves as a stark reminder of the limits of forensic science, even in a system as advanced as Japan's. It proves that a single, focused individual can commit a catastrophic crime and disappear, even when leaving behind perfect DNA. The investigation's dedication highlights the Japanese judicial system's philosophy. There is no statute of limitations for murder, and therefore, the case will never truly be closed until the killer is apprehended. The primary strategy now focuses on international collaboration and leveraging advancements in DNA phenotyping, a technique that attempts to predict a suspect's physical appearance, like hair, eye, and skin color, based on their DNA. While this technology is controversial, the police are exploring every avenue to give a physical face to the ghost whose genetic code they possess. The Setagaya case is no longer just a crime. It is a symbol of a relentless pursuit of justice, a continuous, decades-long promise to the Miyazawa family that the killer will one day be found. The unsolved Setagaya family murder fundamentally changed how Japan approaches forensic investigation and security. The killer's successful evasion, despite the wealth of evidence, prompted massive changes in security infrastructure. The case led to a nationwide push for mandatory DNA submission for all serious crimes, significantly expanding the national database. It also spurred a massive investment in CCTV installation across Tokyo and other major cities. The sheer anonymity of the killer made the authorities realize how easily a person could vanish in the modern urban landscape. The legacy of the case is the chilling understanding that the killer likely lives an ordinary, undetected life somewhere in the world. He has his DNA profile held by police forces internationally, yet he walks free. He could be anyone, a successful businessman, a loving father, a quiet neighbor. His life since January 1st, 2001, has been a life lived on a razor's edge, knowing that a single piece of new information, a distant relative's DNA sample, or a chance conversation could bring the police to his door. The Setagaya family, Mikio, Yasuko, Nina, and Rei, are remembered every year, not just as victims, but as symbols of an unsolved riddle. They were a normal family in a normal home, brutally erased by a figure who possessed an almost superhuman capacity for control and camouflage. The case remains a testament to both the astonishing capabilities of modern forensic science and its frustrating, inherent limitations. The ghost of the Schlesinger man still walks the streets, his unique genetic signature waiting for its match. The only question that remains is when, not if, the meticulous work of 25 years will finally pay off, closing the door on one of the most baffling and chilling unsolved mysteries of our time. Of the Setagaya family murder is one of overwhelming evidence and ultimate frustration. We have the DNA, the fingerprints, the clothing, the timeline, and the chilling psychological profile of a killer who stayed for hours, casually eating the family's ice cream after committing an atrocity. But despite the quarter-century commitment of the Tokyo police and the massive resources poured into the case, the man we call the Schlesinger man remains a phantom. A single, ruthless individual slipped away from a perfect crime scene and vanished. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where is he now? Does he still have that scar on his hand? Does he ever look at his shoes and remember the steps he took that night? And more importantly, is there one person out there, maybe a friend, a coworker, or a distant relative, who saw that unique scarf or noticed those rare sneakers and knows something? Because that one small piece of information is all it would take to finally give the Miyazawa family the justice they deserve. Tell us what you think the motive was. Was it revenge, a random thrill kill, or something else entirely? Leave your theories in the comments below. And if you want more deep dive true crime stories like this, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next case. Thank you for listening.